Hello and welcome to the Our Giant Leap podcast presented by the Space Generation Advisory Council. Our Giant Leap discusses diversity, equity and inclusion issues within the global aerospace industry. My name is Laura.
And my name is Judith, and we are your hosts for today's podcast. The goal is to bring light to a person's career in aerospace and to answer a specific topic. We'll be coming up with tangible outcomes and solutions as takeaways from this podcast. This episode features an interview with Julie Claveau. She is Program Officer at the Canadian Space Agency and is the co-chair of the Women in STEM Advisory Committee there. We'll first be focusing on her career at the Canadian Space Agency and her engagement for gender equality. And then we'll ask her for concrete advice on how to foster gender equality, diversity and inclusion in space agencies.
Hello and welcome, Julie. It is our pleasure to have you as our guest on this podcast. So first, can you please begin by introducing yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Judith, for inviting me today, and welcome everybody to the podcast. Also, thank you to the Space Generation Advisory Council. So as Judith was mentioning, my name is Julie Claveau, and I'm a program officer for Earth observation at the Canadian Space Agency under a program called Smart Earth. I'm a former program scientist in space astronomy, and I acted as deputy mission manager for Canada for the James Webb Space Telescope. And I'm the Women in STEM co-chair as well, as Judith mentioned. And I love to mentor young professionals and undergrad students. I love to advise anybody that needs some advice in the space community. I also do science communications and storytelling as well about my career.
Amazing. You talked about space and the Canadian Space Agency. So the obvious question is, where does your passion for space come from?
That's a very good question. You would think, I always would have known, but to be quite honest, I didn't always know. I just remember when I was little, I would lie on the grass outside in my yard for hours and hours on end, just staring at the sky. For no particular reason. I wasn't necessarily amazed by stars, for example, but just the vastness of space and trying to wrap my head around, how far I was looking into. Like, is it infinite? Does it keep going on forever? And, you look at the blue and you're like, it seems like there's a sheet of something that ends, but, I knew that it didn't. And that just boggled my mind right from a very young age. But it's not per se that I was necessarily in my head and my heart was like, yes, I'm going to go, work at the space agency. I'm going to, work in the space sector. I was very young and I was just curious, right, about the vastness of space in general. And I really loved solving problems. So naturally I was good at math and I really liked sciences as well. And I had a big influence from my parents, my father primarily, who is an engineer. And science was very important. So I guess I kind of took that on. And then it's not until I reached university where, again, science was kind of like, that's where you go, because if you can do, in his mind, if you can do science, and I'm not saying this is the absolute truth, but if you can do science according to him, likely you can do a lot of other things as well. I'm not particularly sure that I agree with that. It really depends on what you enjoy doing. But that was the mindset I had back then. So I was like, okay, so, I'll do science. That way, as many doors as possible will open themselves to me. And then, I tried at first year university, I tried biology, I tried geography, I tried engineering. So I took a few courses, electives in different science departments. And it became clear to me very quickly that biology wasn't for me. I felt like there was not enough problem solving for me. So, and it's not true because there is a lot of problem solving, but it was more like, remember this and then, tell it back to us. And I was like, okay, well, that's nice, but I'd like to get to the problem solving. And then chemistry was very rigid, I felt, for me. It was very structured. You had to calculate things exactly and very precisely before you made mixes in your labs. And I was like, it's too structured for me, and with reason. And that's fine. It has to be that way. So chemistry was out of the question. Geography was a bit like biology to me. Engineering was, again, a little bit structured. The mindset was different. And I don't remember exactly why engineering didn't appeal to me. Maybe it's because I didn't want to be like my dad. I don't know. Although he's a very nice person. But when I hit physics and astronomy, there was astronomy electives. I was like, yes, like I can be creative. They give me a problem to solve. I can solve problems. However I get there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be perfect or like, but I just need to be able to justify how I got my answer. So it was a perfect mix of everything when I hit physics and astronomy. And so that's sort of like how I made my way into space.
I can totally relate to what you're saying because for me it was the opposite. Was my father motivated in astronomy, and I became an engineer. So I'm the opposite. So I'll let you now with Judith for the other questions.
So jumping on your education and what you studied at university, do you feel that it prepared you efficiently for a career at the Canadian Space Agency?
Oh my gosh, no. I thought I was going to come out of university and I thought I was going to be solving, math problems, very complicated math problems or physics problems or writing codes of some kind. And, there are some jobs that are like that. But my work at the Canadian Space Agency is I would call it administrative in nature. Like I administer programs and like space missions. So it's sort of like project management. And project management, I mean, you have to talk to stakeholders, like different people, like industries, other governments, academia, to see what they need and what they want, like how we want to advance science. And then you have to write contracts and do competitions. And so it's kind of administrative in nature, but obviously you can't lead a project like that without having a background and a general understanding of the subject. So the foundation and the knowledge is important, but my work is primarily administrative. One thing that I did notice in all of my jobs and throughout my career is that the most meaningful thing that I learned through my education was the ability to learn and how to make meaningful connections. So whatever new job you have, whether it's in the space sector or not, there will be a learning curve. And when you get into a professional kind of setting, like a space agency, you have to learn quickly. So your ability to learn and to research materials and to read and to understand what you're reading, even if it's not your specific background, that is primordial. And it's fundamental to any job or career. And then the other thing that I learned is how to structure my time, how to meet deadlines, like have a homework assignments, like how to meet deadlines and make sure that you get to those deadlines, how to do presentations. So writing technical documents or presenting the technical documents and supporting your point with evidence. Those are the skills that I learned in my undergrad that are fundamental to any job that I've applied to. So it's not necessarily the content, it's more the soft skills that I learned.
Can you guide us through your career at the Canadian Space Agency and tell us more about what you do there?
Absolutely. So I started at the Canadian Space Agency as a mission planner for an Earth observation satellite that's called RADARSAT-2, and it was in the data acquisition team. So essentially my role was to take community needs. So they would send me these files that said, I want to take an image with this resolution of this farmland or this ice melting. And I would take everybody's requests and make sure none of them were over the same region at the same time. And so we would do a sort of like what we call the deconflicting. And then I would, once everything was good for all the orbits that they had requested for the month and all the images, then I would put it into the system, and I would tell the satellite, where to take images, in what beam mode, and in what orbit, and then the system would send them automatically when they were taken. So that was my first role. And then I got pregnant with my third child, so I took 1 year of maternity leave. And when I came back, they put me as project manager for the opening of the RADARSAT-1 historical archive. So this is the predecessor of RADARSAT-2, which is and the data is historical. It's I think it's 1996 or 1997 all the way to like 2012. So the opening that data is it's very precious because we can make time comparisons. What did for example, the ice poles look like in 1997, and what do they look like now? Like, how has it changed over time? Like, you can clearly see it. So it's very important to open that to the public. But a lot of the data was in ground stations. So like satellites have reception stations across the world. And countries have agreements between each other, like, yeah, you can use this station, and yes, you can use this station, where the satellites, when they're in orbit above that specific point, they will download information and upload information, whatever is required. So a lot of the data for RadarSat 1 was actually on tapes. It wasn't even digitalized on a computer. It was like so we had to like call the countries that had the data, and we had to, and we're still in the process of doing that. I'm no longer the project manager, but essentially was setting up all those conversations with all the international stakeholders to get that data back, and then finding a company and giving out a contract to make sure that that we could digitalize them and put them on a computer, and also process them after. So they're actual images, digital images that you can look at and draw information from. So I was project manager for that. I did like a business case, a project management plan. I asked for funding. I did a survey to the community to know the needs. So a lot of administrative work, what you would find in terms of project management. And then, I started talking internally and getting involved outside with things like NASA Space Apps. And then I built my network, and I spoke about my love for astronomy. And then eventually I got approached by the manager of the space astronomy team. He said, "Hey, I heard you're an astrophysicist, and we don't have a lot of those around here." He's like, "I might have some work that needs to be done. Would you be interested?" It was like a hallway conversation. I was like, sure. And by that point, I wasn't permanent at the agency. So we spoke to my manager, and then I was shared half time with both. And then eventually, when the project was accepted for the RadarSat 1, they switched project manager to somebody else, which is often the case when you have projects. So somebody else took on the file, and I was able to start working full time for the astronomy team. And the James Webb Space Telescope mission was it was just before launch, like a year before launch. So we had to put the contracts for operations. We had to do the transition to operations, the commissioning once it was launched. And then we needed to put the grants for the first cycle of observations out. So I wrote, the announcement of opportunity. I did the project management documentation for the transition to operations. I went to ask for funding, the executive. So it was a lot of work, but I'm very happy to have done that. And then in the meantime, I still wasn't permanent, right? So I was applying to jobs at the CSA to be permanent. And I ended up winning the position as program officer for Earth observation. So for the program Smart Earth, which I am right now. So we work with the Earth observation community, and we give contracts for application development, contributions to the Canadian industries to develop applications in Earth observation, or to grants to researchers in Earth observations at universities so that they can do their research. And that's what I'm doing right now.
What motivated you to join the Canadian Space Agency? How was the application process and entering this new world for you?
Oh gosh, it was super difficult. And to be honest, I never really, it wasn't my plan when I was little. Like, I'm going to get to the Canadian Space Agency, or like, I'm going to be an astronaut. It was never like that. To be honest, I never really knew what I wanted to do. I was kind of just tootling along and hoping that someday I would find something that would align with my heart. So when I finished my undergrad with a physics and astronomy degree, most of the job postings that I looked at said, engineering required, or like engineer, or so it was, maybe I didn't diversify my search terms. I don't know. I also didn't have anybody to guide me that could help me, like a mentor or like an advisor of some kind. So in hindsight, that's something that I would have really been grateful for, like maybe more people to guide me. And perhaps I should have asked my professors for some help, but they're also very, most of their contacts are academic. So they don't necessarily have contacts in the, space industries or government. Sometimes they do. So it's about networking, talking to people, but I didn't have that. At that point in my life, I was about to get married and have children. So I wanted stability and job security with a steady income and something that I could just be comfortable in. So I joined the public service, which it actually took me, the public service is government. So I joined the government, but not in the space agency. It was at Health Canada, I believe, as an administrative assistant. And what I didn't realize at the time is that was actually like, looking back in hindsight, that could have easily been like a strategy. This is one of the things that I suggest or recommend to a lot of the people that I mentor is, a good way to get into any company is to just apply and get into the company in any position at all, even if it's an administrative job, something that you may find, boring, or something that you may find that doesn't suit your skill set, because you're going to meet people and you're going to build your network and you're going to gain experience, even if it's not technical experience, if it's administrative experience, you're still learning. You're learning, the end. You can always draw from that experience. And also, there's some job opportunities that are only open to internal employees. So that's something that I didn't know, which consequently eventually really helped me, because the first posting that I applied to at the Canadian Space Agency was an internal posting only to government employees that were in the Montreal region, which happened. And then you needed a degree in like some sort of science related field, probably more physics related, or geomatics or geography, which I had. So already it was very specific, and you had to be bilingual, which I'm perfectly bilingual. So it always helps to know more than one language, especially English. And then I applied, and honestly, everything went badly. Like the night that I my kids were sick, and the day that the whole week before I had to apply, I had to stay up late nights to like do my application, answer all the questions. And then the day that I was ready to submit, which was the very last day, the website was down for an entire day and I couldn't apply. So then I remembered that a colleague of mine had been working again at Health Canada, that very first job that I had. She had gotten into the CSA as an admin assistant, and I had her as a friend on Facebook. So I called her up on Facebook. I sent her a message at like 11 p.m. on a Friday night. Who's on Facebook on Friday night at 11 p.m.? She was there, and she knew someone in human resources. What are the odds? So she sent me her email, and I just applied by email. So just a whole bunch of like coincidences that like aligned perfectly, and they accepted my application. And even like during the exam, my husband had a concussion and I had to bring him to the emergency, and then I had to bring my kids to the interview, and like somebody had to watch them for me while I was interviewing. It was just a disaster, but I ended up getting the job. So I was like, so it was quite interesting, an adventure. So that's how I got to the CSA, but I was only on loan, like at the government. Like when you're inside an institution, like any company of any kind, sometimes other departments have needs, right? And then they'll ask the other departments if they have employees that can support. So that's the job that I got. It was like, was at Transport Canada at that point, and they agreed to loan me to the Canadian Space Agency for 2 years. So I wasn't even permanent at the beginning at the CSA. I was supposed to go back to Transport, but I ended up staying. So that's how I entered it. Quite a zigzaggy kind of route.
And I think what it's proving also, going back to what you said before about learning how to network and meeting people and the connections that can be helpful during your studies, which is one of the things you said you learned. This is kind of the proof that the network can be helpful in those type of cases.
Absolutely.
When you look back at your career at the Canadian Space Agency, what are you the most proud of?
I just being part of the mission, the James Webb Space Telescope mission, as deputy mission manager, and seeing those first images and 20 years of work just successfully launched into space, into like one of the greatest observatories ever, and seeing the quality of the first images and all the galaxies that we could see, and being part of that, even if it was just for the last 2 years before the launch. That was the highlight of my career. I was there with the media team at the Canadian Space Agency with all the executives and all the important people. And I was like, yeah, like I'm a small part, but I was part of the mission. And it was just so exciting. I felt like everything that I had ever dreamed of had come true, but things not that I consciously dreamed of, but things that my heart were pulling me towards. So it made me realize just truly how much astronomy, not necessarily space or the space sector in general, but astronomy is really aligned with my heart, and how like just having had the chance to make that small contribution to my community, it was such an amazing experience.
As a professional, what advice would you like to give to other young professionals, students going and about to start their career? What advice would you like to give them on how to align professional and personal goals?
That's a very good question. So I'm going to say be true to your heart, but it's very difficult to know what your heart wants and like learn the language of the heart. Sometimes, we're very aligned logically with what we feel like we need a plan and categories. And the heart has a very specific way of speaking to us. Sometimes it comes as fear. And then like we see something and like our heart explodes with joy, but we're overcome with fear at the same time. But it's like, am I scared, or is that not meant for me? Like, am I going this way? And then just having to overstep that fear is it's challenging. And sometimes that fear is there for a reason. It's like, it's telling you, no, don't go there. So you're kind of like, you have an inner compass and an inner voice that talks to you. And that goes for everything, right? For me, like my children are very, very important to me. And so every year I try to take a few months to be with them, like 1 or 2 months. And it was scary for me the first time, like I had to take 2 months off because I was like, am I going to lose my job? Like, are people, but that's what I believe in. Like, I fundamentally believe that family comes first. Our children are the most beautiful souls there are. They're our future generation, and they deserve all the love and attention in the world, and we don't have enough time to be with them, like truly be with them. When you're working all day, you're tired on the weekend, like it's not quality time. Like spending time with my children was very important for me. So I didn't take no for an answer. I was like, well, if you want to fire me, but like, this is what I believe in. And, by doing that, and this is one example out of a bazillion that I could come up with, but by doing that, you are being literally the change that you want to see in the world. We say that mental health is important. Well, what does that look like? What does that look like, mental health? If that is something that is important to you, then it means turning off your computer at like 4:00 when your day's work is finished and not accepting any more requests from work afterwards, because you need some time to decompress, to go for a walk, to have, make a nice meal, take a warm bath, read some books. Then that's what you value, right? If you accept somebody to overpass your boundary and give you more work later in the evenings. And for myself, like I don't mind, I'm very flexible, but for some other people that might not be okay for them. And it's scary, right? If your employer asks you to do things, which, it's never happened in my situation, but I have heard of others in other institutions that it has happened to. It's scary to be like, well, I'm sorry, I'll get back to you tomorrow, right? To stand up for what you fundamentally believe in. If you believe that, women should have a voice at the table when you're in a meeting and nobody allows you to speak, then politely, raise your hand, or, at the end of the meeting, say the point that you want to say. Don't be overwhelmed and don't be scared to be the change that you want to be. And that, I hope that answers the question. I could give so many different examples. If you find, I don't know, that you come into a hurdle in your career where your teammates or your team is not aligned with the way that you view the world, and it's making your life miserable, but you feel like that's the only opportunity that you have, it isn't. There are other opportunities. It's important to stay true to yourself and to be the change that you want to see. Hope that answers the question.
It does. I'll leave it now to Laura.
We talked about you being program officer at the Canadian Space Agency, and since 2018, you are also the co-chair of the Women in STEM Advisory Committee. So first, what made you want to join this committee?
You're probably expecting something very profound.
Yes.
So, funny story. When I first joined the Canadian Space Agency, within the first few weeks, usually in October, November, the committee has an annual general meeting. And I was looking for ways to increase my outwork and, to get involved in the space agency. And I was interested. They sent an invitation to all the employees to come and hear what, their mandate was, what they were working on. It was at lunchtime. And so that day I actually completely forgot. I had a meeting that, went a little bit longer. Then I went to lunch. And when I came back to my computer, I saw that the meeting had 5 minutes left. So I ran really quickly to the meeting room, opened the door, like in the last, 2 minutes of the meeting. Everybody looked at me, and the past co-chair said, "So that's it for today. I hope you like the presentation. The next item on the agenda is we need to select a new co-chair. Is there anybody that would be interested?" And by this time, I wasn't even sitting down yet. I was still in the doorway, and my heart started pounding like so loud. And I was like, no, 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 no. And then I looked around, nobody had their hand up. And then sure enough, with a mind of its own, my hand shut right up. Like it went up in the air. And I was like, oh, what am I doing? Like, why? I'm late. Like, I don't even know what this committee is about. And so by extension, I kind of became the co-chair, which actually ended up being perfect because I met with after a week or so, I met with the other co-chair, and she explained to me a little bit more in detail, like on a personal level, what was going on. I was like, yes, like exactly. Like I totally want to do this. This is perfect. So my heart knew before I even did. And having been in that role for quite some time, I really do feel like I've had a big impact on a variety of different, topics relating to equity, diversity, and specifically inclusion. And like it's been an amazing experience. But yeah, sometimes what drives you is not necessarily a thought, but sometimes it's a feeling. And sometimes you don't even know you believe in something before the opportunity presents itself to you. And when that opportunity presents itself to you, sometimes it's very scary and you have no idea why, but it just pushes you in a direction. And essentially, like that's what happened to me. So again, like it's all about following our hearts, and sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it makes no sense, and you don't understand why until much later. But that's how I joined the committee as co-chair.
I like it when you said sometimes what drives you is not always a thought, but it can be a feeling. This was a bold move, and that's amazing. So, following question, what is the goal of the committee? Can you explain a bit more?
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, it's increasing awareness about the benefits of diversity and inclusion. We also provide education and networking opportunities so that people, and this is not exclusive to women, we want to be included, therefore we are inclusive. We lead by example, so we invite everybody to join our whatever events or whatever we do for the agency. And so we create networking opportunities. We're also working to increase representation, so increase women in scientific roles at the agency and in management positions. And we engage with members and management as well. So, when you have a dream or a hope, right? Like you can't do it alone. You have to talk to people about what you do, why it's good, and so we engage with our members. We talk to them. We see what they want. And then we talk to management and the executives. And we say, this is the vision that we have. Are you on board with us? So very collaborative in nature. And obviously, we try to support the sustainable development goals as well in whatever capacity we can. A little bit like right now, with a podcast or some mentoring or things like that.
Great. And then a deeper question. In your opinion, what is the evolution of the awareness about gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in space agencies?
Oof, that's a very big question because I think it's different everywhere. And this is my personal opinion, because everybody has different cultures and different perspectives, right? I mean, there are cultures where women have always been cherished and they've always been the leaders of their communities. There are, I know of some indigenous communities that women are the leaders, right? So the challenges are different everywhere. So honestly, I'm not sure if you're comfortable talking about all the different space agencies, but for the ones that I know that are more westernized, I guess, in terms of culture, I feel that there's been tremendous improvement over the years. There's still progress to be made, but I think more and more, and especially in science-related fields, it's one thing, but in space agencies, I mean, we don't send any mission to space without collaboration, right? And we collaborate with other countries, right? And by collaborating with other countries, you're collaborating with other cultures, with different skill sets. So diversity and inclusion is kind of a given in the space sector. You can't do any big momentous, mission without diversity as a whole. And I've seen in the past 20 or so years, in terms of gender diversity, there's been huge improvement. But yeah, still a long way to go. I've even heard some places say that they want to achieve a 50-50 representation, like 50% women. But it always makes me wonder, like, do we want to force women to do things that necessarily they don't want to be doing just because we want to have that 50-50%, diversity and cut? Or do we want to just open the doors for those that may potentially want to be but feel like they're restrained and they can't, right? And if it's option B, then we may not hit the 50-50 because maybe not as many women are interested. And that should also be okay. Like, we don't want to be in a position where we're forcing women to become scientists or like engineers because we want to attain like a 50% representation. But yeah, so I feel like there's been a huge improvement in a variety of different space agencies that I know of. But there's still progress in terms of, bias and inclusion. So we can always improve. But yeah, I feel like there's been quite a bit of evolution.
So thank you, Julie. We are now going to have a short break and listen to our teammate for the fun fact segment.
This episode's fun fact is about Sophie Adenot. Sophie Adenot is the second French woman astronaut in history, after Claudie Aignoret, who made her first flight aboard the Mir station in 1996. She is one of the 5 new astronauts selected to represent the European Space Agency. The 40-year-old engineer from Burgundy was selected alongside 1 other woman and 3 men. She was picked from more than 22 candidates, and she will join the 7 active European astronauts. Sophie Adenot says that she was always curious and that she grew up with the soul of an explorer. She graduated from the National School of Aeronautics and Space and has flown 3,000 flight hours as a helicopter test pilot in the Air Force. She also completed a master's at MIT on how to design a centrifuge to help astronauts train for different levels of gravity. Her grandfather, a mechanic in the Air Force, was one of the many people who inspired her by giving her newspaper articles about science and always opening new possibilities for her. It is because of the scientist Marie Curie and the astronaut Claudie Aignoret that she decided she wanted to be a scientist. Sophie Adenot spent 15 years giving lectures about the importance of science and was awarded the French National Order of Merit in 2022 for being an ambassador for gender equality in science. She would like to be able to pass on the passion to young people. Her method to study for exam is to study every little aspect and not leave any aspect behind, to keep the stress level low enough and to enjoy the process. For her, an astronaut does not have a gender, and she hopes that in the future, the question of gender will not even come up. That was it for the fun fact. Thank you for listening.
And we're back. Can you give us examples of activities that you bring to the Canadian Space Agency with the Women in STEM Advisory Committee?
Absolutely. So this actually changed a little bit, I feel, since I became co-chair like 6 or 7 years ago. I feel like before it was more, it's an advisory committee, right? So we would give advice on behalf of women in science and management at the Canadian Space Agency. So it was not necessarily, activities based. It was more advisory based. And then when I came in, I felt like it's one thing to give advice, but in order to give advice, you also need to know what the members need. So you need a way to communicate with them, and you need to create opportunities as well for management and executives, that people of all levels, really, in all different departments at the agency. You have to give them opportunities to talk, right, and to talk about these subjects, not just about the James Webb Space Telescope mission and the project management aspects of it. You need to create time specifically for having those discussions. So we hold speed networking events once in a while, where we invite the executives and the directors to come, and we invite everybody at the agency. Like I said, right, we could invite just the women, but the idea is if we want to be included, we have to be inclusive. So lead by example is very important. So we do speed networking. We have webinars also with guest speakers, people that are inspirational, that have, a nice, like a career path that we aspire to have, or somebody that's making a difference. We also have speakers that come to give us a little bit of help, with our resume building or interview skills, things like that. We also do panels. We hosted maybe 2 or 3 panels in the past. So we invite like different speakers from across the agency, from different backgrounds, and we ask them specific questions about a topic, and then we have a Q&A at the end for about 30 minutes where we ask people to ask their questions and initiate discussions and really talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I also have a monthly newsletter. So we have a distribution list of people that we send information to. So it could be, and we try to keep it very short because people are busy, but we'll send them information like, here's something cool one of your colleagues did this month. Or so we try to highlight, people that we think did great work at the agency. We also send them, opportunities for professional development. So if there's like webinars or events that they could attend, we send that to them in the newsletter. We also try to send some fun like games and some links related to further reading that they could learn more on the subject, on any kind of subject, really, whether it's job development, project management. So we give them snippets of information in the newsletter. Another thing that's big is we try to collaborate with as many of the other networks and sectors of the agency as possible, because there is strength in numbers. There's strength in numbers, and by working together on similar goals, you're helping each other reach your goals, but you're also increasing each other's visibility, right? So, for example, we've done collaborations with practically every network, but let's talk about that. We have another committee that's the Visible Minority Network, and they do a diversity event every year, or not since the pandemic, but before that, it was every year, where people from different backgrounds and different cultures would bring, different snacks and drinks, like non-alcoholic beverages, obviously. But it was really pleasant. We'd meet together, and then they'd share with us their food and like the little things they'd prepare, and then the Women in STEM committee would support, with the organization of the event, and we were there as well. We'd bring some food as well. And it really shows that, and this is one thing that I didn't realize while it was happening to me, was just natural. I'm like, well, we want to be nice. Like, we want to make friends, right? We want to help, help you with your mandate. Like, can we, land some hands? And what ended up happening is it showed that we were open and that we were welcoming and helpful. And so by collaborating with other networks, we ended up increasing our visibility like tenfold, because people just thought we were thoughtful. So I didn't realize that. And we also give advice. So we give, obviously, an advisory committee. Once a year, we go to the executive committee and we tell them what we've done for the organization, for our members. We give them statistics about representation, how many women are in specific roles, for example. And then we give recommendations. We say, well, we can recommend that the agency work on this for the next year. And then they say, yes, please go ahead. And then we go off and then we make it happen. And then the next year we come back, we report, we're like, oh, we did this. Thank you for your support. And then we just carry on. So that's what we do.
So you talked about the events, newsletters, panel you organized, or the recommendations you gave. So for you, what was the one you felt had the most impact?
Oh, that's a good one. We hosted, I mean, a lot of them had impact, but we did a panel for International Women's Day. I think it was last year. It was Break the Bias, hashtag Break the Bias. And so we did a panel for that day, and we invited people from across the agency. So we invited a student to be on the panel. We invited an administrative assistant. We invited an employee. We invited media, like a mid-career professional, so someone like a supervisor, manager, a director, executive director, and the president of the CSA. So we had a very, very diverse group, equal representation of each level of, not level, but each step of a career path. And in that, we had people from different backgrounds, the cultural backgrounds. So we had, people from, different cultural backgrounds. We had also somebody that was handicapped. We had men, we had women, we had different age groups. So we really tried and make a very conscious effort to have representation for everything. And this was done organically. Like, it wasn't necessarily like we didn't have a goal in it. We just said, like, we need to show the example of what it looks like when you're inclusive. And the same thing with the chairs of the panel, the moderators. We ended up asking somebody with experience, because we're always asked, when you moderate a panel, it has to be somebody with experience that can respond and ask questions accordingly. We don't want somebody that is not experienced and that is going to throw off the event. And we're like, well, that's not really fair. Like, I mean, what about other people who want to get the experience? So we ended up doing a double moderator with somebody with more experience and somebody with less experience. And people love that. Like, they each had a role to play, and the one that had more experience gave more place to the one that had less experience. So the one with less experience actually asked more of the questions. But when the one with more experience would see that she was struggling, or she was struggling, he would like jump in and try to like help patch the holes. It was so organic and beautiful to see. And the discussion topic was bias in general, not just for women, just bias in general. So we were asking, we asked 2 or 3 questions, I believe, which was, what does bias mean to you? And each person has something completely different to say. And then give us an example of bias that you have either seen or been subject to, or that you have done yourself, something that you have been biased against unwillingly. And then and then the third question was, tell us a concrete action that anybody today can take action to remove any biases from their workspace, like today, like now, like not something grand, a very small step, a very small action that everybody can take into action. And just the variety of different, like the conversation that came out of that, like people felt like empowered. We were asked to do it again. And, we ended up realizing the summary of this whole event essentially is, we all have bias. So we not always, but we all bias against something or someone, like every single human on the planet. So the first step is, well, try to identify your own biases. And if you don't think you have any, well, that's a problem. So like identify any, and try to work on it yourself so that you're not adding to the bias that's already existing. And then the second thing that we ended up figuring out is that, let's say there's somebody that has bias against something. Most of the time it's completely unconscious. So it's not an attack against you personally. So there's no need to be defensive about it. Yeah, it sucks that, I don't know, you have 3 children and the employer or the person that's hiring doesn't think you'll be able to do the job because you're constantly busy with your children. It's bias. But you have a choice. You can either feel sad about it and create a war, or you can just move on and be like, okay, well, that's not the world I want to create. I am available. I do want to work. And then you go look elsewhere and another door will open somewhere else. You just move on. So yeah, those are the 2 things that came out, and it's for everybody and anybody. And that was just an amazing event. It had tremendous impacts in the agency.
Yeah, so what you're doing is amazing, and I wish I were there. But do you sometimes get negative feedbacks when defending gender equality? And if so, what do you say to convince people that it is a legitimate cause?
Okay, so just to start, I would like to address like the word defend. Like, I mean, when you're defensive, it's like you're being attacked, right? I don't think, and like I just discussed previously on the last question, a lot of it is unconscious. So I choose not to take a negative stance, and honestly, I just stay true to myself. So if I don't know, not that it's happened, but just to give an example, if I felt like my employer didn't trust me as much as he trusted my female colleagues, for example, okay, well, I'm not going to try to prove like by like stepping into his office and be like, yeah, like I feel like you're like, I'm not going to defend. Like I know my worth. I know I can do this job. So I'm just going to do my job as best I can. And I'm going to prove to them that by doing my job, by being true to myself, that I can do it. And I'm just as worthy as my male counterparts. That's what I would do. Right. And this is true in any situation. So I don't think it's necessarily defending gender equality. You are there, so be you, and that's it. And eventually, like, it'll become, well, I had a female employee before. She was amazing. You know, she did great work. I mean, and I didn't even have to start a war or anything. Like, I didn't have to defend anything. I was there, and I did what I had to do. So the next time that hiring manager sees a woman on a hiring competition, then he won't have that bias anymore, right? That the woman is less capable. He'll just be like, oh yeah, like women are so awesome. Like I had one before. So the bias will be broken just by you being yourself. So I think that we need to stop looking at it like we're defending or we're getting negative feedback, and we just need to not be affected by it whatsoever and just carry on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is a good attitude to have, and just move on and try to do our best.
What steps can an employee, for example, of a space agency, follow to get management involved in promoting gender equality, also diversity and inclusion in their organization? For example, where do you start if there is no committee about visible minority or no women in STEM committee in your organization?
So the first thing, that's a very good question. The first thing, I mean, it's engaging with people, right? And taking the lead. Like you have to stop waiting for somebody to get things done. And if you feel there's a need and it should be addressed, the first thing you do is you talk to people, right? You see if other people feel the same way as you, because if you're alone, you're not going to get anywhere in anything, right? So if you want to start a committee, you need to start by talking to people. And you need to be that person that does it and not wait for somebody else to do it. So talk to people. Hey, like, how do you feel about, the representation at the agency? Do you feel like there's enough women in roles? Do you feel there's hurdles? Like, is it harder for you? Like if there's other women, or if there's women that want a job at the jobs at the agency and they didn't, then you talk to them. Like, did you feel there's hurdles? Have you applied many times? Like, is there, so you have to identify the needs and the wants of the community. And then you talk to other people. You talk to managers about, how do you see this? Where do you see this vision? So it takes a few years, but you have to plant seeds, and then you have to water them and let them grow on their own. When you introduce a new idea, a new concept, it takes people, a little while to, subconsciously kind of absorb the information and think about it. It's just start conversations. That's the first step. And then try to get support as well, right? Once you've had those conversations, you've waited a little while, you've, gained support from different peers, from other people within your agency or your organization. Then after that, you try to come up with, together, like you meet together and you come up with a plan, nothing formal at this point. So you can meet together and you make some sort of a plan. Like, what is it? What's our vision? Like, what do we want it to look like? What kind of support do we need to get there? Do we need support from human resources? Do we need support from the executives? Because whatever happens within any organization, really, like employees can have a vision, but it needs to be supported by upper management. And so you need to bring them to a point where they feel convinced that that is what's best for the agency. So, or the organization, sorry. So you have to build, like, it's sort of like a mini business case. Like, here are the people that I spoke to. Here are the people that support us. Here's the vision that we see, and here's how we're going to get there. And here, like, if you want to build a committee, once you've had, that discussion with the executive committee or the higher ups in your organization, you have to ask for a place at the table, and you have to be backed up, right? You can't be like, well, I've spoken to nobody and nobody agrees with me, but I feel like this. No, like, you need people behind you. You need people to have the same vision. So you have to bring them to that point by having conversations and some sort of plan as well, right? So you will set up meetings with different people, say, hey, like, you have 5 minutes go for a cup of coffee, or just have a Teams chat. I'd like to ask you a question about X, and then you start a discussion that way. Well, thank you. I'm great to have your perspective on this. But what they don't know is that you put that idea in their head, right? So now all of a sudden they're thinking about it, like, oh, interesting conversation I had. And then once you've had these conversations, these meetings, then you want to go ahead and if you have the okay, from the executives to work in that direction, then you can ask to build terms of reference. So terms of references essentially is, what are the people that are going to be involved? Like, are you going to have a chair? How many members are you going to have on your committee? What are the roles of each person? How many hours a month are these people going to be working on this and not on their actual, like, job that we're paying them to do, right? And for us, we have 4 hours a month that we can at the Women in STEM Committee, the Canadian Space Agency. So roles, responsibilities, vision, mandate. So you work on that collectively with a group of people that you've assembled that will eventually become the official committee. And then you go back to the executive committee, and then you get their approval. And if it doesn't work, you keep coming back. You get more support. You make sure that you refine, your documents, your vision, and whatnot, and you let the thoughts of people mature. And then you come back and you bring back the idea, and eventually it gets accepted.
What advice would you like to give to your younger self when starting your professional career?
Oh, that's a good one. So first, I guess, like, network and talk to people. Like, people used to talk to me about, network. I hear that word a lot, but I had no idea what it meant. I always thought it was some big thing, a bit like mentoring. So networking essentially is just talking to people, like, talk to your friends, talk to your, professors, talk to your family, talk to everybody. Those people are your network. And, when you talk about your dreams, your aspirations, your uncertainties, it'll initiate interesting discussions from which you can draw information and inspire dreams from, right? So, and it'll help guide you as well and figure out what you want. So develop your network and talk, like, don't be shy, talk to people, not just your friends, like everybody that's around you. Go say hi to, professors that you've never spoken to, or if you're at a career fair, go to booths and, talk to people, say, hey, how you doing? My name is, Julie, and I'd like to talk to you about what you're doing here. Like, what's your job? Like, just initiate discussions, build your network, because sometimes those discussions is what's going to bring you opportunities in the future. Second one is mentorship. Find mentors, people that will give you advice. So within your network, it could be your friends, it could be your profs, your family, your employers, if you have an employer. And, tag up with them once in a while, once a month, with specific goal to talk about where you're at, what you're hoping to achieve in the next year, how you feel about the choices that you've made now that you're living them. You're like, oh, I didn't really feel like, I thought that's what I wanted, but maybe it isn't what I want. So talk to them, and then they can help ask you questions to realign. Well, what is it really that you want? Is it something more technical, or is it something more management? Or your mentors will be able to align you. And also, you can talk about your personal life, because sometimes your personal life happens and then it changes your trajectory. Like, you had this goal for this year, and now all of this stuff happened in your personal life. And, your mentors will be able to help you ask you insightful questions to help guide you. And it could be formal, just like it could be informal. It could be like a formal mentor, or it could be an informal mentor, like a friend. The third one is don't be afraid to take small opportunities. Sometimes you see like all these volunteer things that you don't get paid for, and it seems so tedious, and you're like, but I want to get paid for my expertise. Or, you'll see an opportunity as a barista somewhere serving coffee, and you're like, but I'm a scientist. I don't want to serve coffee. Like you'll see all these little opportunities pop up. And sometimes, it seems like things are below you, or they're not timely, or they're not properly paid, but at the end of the day, any opportunity, however small or insignificant it may seem to you, will bring worth and value to your life. You will learn essential skills. It could be, just how to get along with people, work with different people, appreciate the value of administrative staff, which, will, it could be public service, customer service. It could be like anything, even if it's not technical. You're developing skills, you're learning things, you're building your network. Obviously, if you don't have time or the energy, you don't have to take every single opportunity, but don't underestimate the value of the smaller opportunities that present themselves to you, because they can have a very big impact down the line. And lastly is just be true to yourself. If you believe in something, you don't need to be aggressive about it, but you can just continue down that road. It's like, well, that's what I believe. And if you don't agree, that's okay. But I believe this, and these are my needs, and these are my aspirations, and that is where I'm going. So set your boundary, be true to yourself, and dare to dream big.
Thank you, Julie, for your time and for sharing your amazing experience and thoughts on the subject. So as a wrapping up question, can you share with us a funny story from your work or your studies?
Ooh, funny story. So other than the story about how I became co-chair of CSA's Women in STEM Committee, I would have to say during university, I took some philosophy courses because I thought it was super interesting. I still love philosophy. And in my final exam, I walked in, sat down, and it was a white piece of paper with the question, why, written on the paper. And that is all. And then I could see everybody around me just like struggling and like just writing away. Like, I don't know what they were writing. I'm like, why, what? Like, what? Like, what do you want? So I just, after sitting there for a couple of minutes, I was like, well, there really is no question. So I just wrote because with a full stop at the end. And then I walked away. That was my final exam. And I got an A+.
Yes, that's a really funny story, and I'm happy that it worked for you. So during this podcast, we learned a lot about how to foster gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in public organizations. You can interact directly with us on the Diversity and Gender Equality Project Group social media and leave feedback or advice from your side. Also, let us know, who would you like us to interview next?
For more information and resources, please visit the Diversity and Gender Equality Project Group website as part of the Space Generation Advisory Council. Thank you all for listening. We're your hosts Laura and Judith, signing off.